Hello, class. Today I'll be discussing fallacies of argument. If you have your book, go ahead and turn to page 79, chapter 5. I had assigned this before, but I thought it was a little too early. I didn't want to make this a review when we get to this section. Having an understanding of fallacies is really crucial for critical thinking, and it's one of the course objectives is understanding fallacies of argument. It's important, not only for a critical thinking course, but as you navigate college and life, in my opinion. With that being said, I'm going to teach this chapter a little bit different. I want you to read the whole of this chapter, chapter 5. Understand, having a deep understanding of fallacies of argument, okay? So it's on you to read 79 to 96. Should have read that by now, to be honest, but in writing about this and in using it in this essay, I want you to also prove that you understand which fallacy you're focusing in on, okay? The way I'm going to teach this chapter is basically in the context of our essay for essay number 3. Okay, we're going to be looking at not only establishing and using claims up until this point. We're going to also have a lesson on causal claims, kind of a short and sweet lesson, but that will be something we discuss here. But using claims that we've used at this point, whether it's all of the claim cast, resemblance claim, evaluation claim, etc. Right, you're going to select a minimum of 3 short stories from Drown, which exemplify a larger overall theme, which are listed there on your prompt. But what's important and what makes this a little bit different for this essay is you're going to have to incorporate at least 2 fallacies of argument, and this is where the rub comes in, as you've seen in my previous prompt breakdown. This is where you are going to really sharpen and improve your critical thinking skills. Okay, so I want us to think about that. So the way I'm going to teach this is in the context of this assignment. Still, though, I want you to understand, just like what we did with visual rhetoric and looking at ads, I want you to think about how fallacies of argument are used. Like I said, it always going to come back to it will always come back to politics and politicians. Either side, I don't care if you're right, left, independent, green, whatever. Right? You're gonna understand and learn how people use fallacies of argument. Okay, or how you can become critical kind of navigator of the world and understand when arguments seem fallacious. Okay, let's go ahead and jump. Let's go to page 80. Flip the page. I want to define fallacies. Okay, fallacies are what? They're argumentative moves flawed by their nature or structure. Because such tactics can make principal argument more difficult, they potentially hurt everyone involved, including the people responsible for them. Okay, as I said, we're going to think about this in the context of a larger kind of larger argumentation here, critical argumentation, using the short stories as a way to unpack this idea. We're going to look at themes, but more importantly, or not more importantly, but just as important, you're going to use these fallacies of arguments effectively in unpacking these short stories. Okay, and we'll dive into that in just a moment. Okay. The worst sort of fallacies muck up the frank but civil conversations that people should be able to have regardless of their differences. Okay, so, and this is not going to be brand new material in the sense that we understand with rhetorical, how things are presented rhetorically, same thing here, right? And you're like, wow, this is super repetitive. And it is in a way, but it's for effect, right? And it's because it makes sense. The first ones we're going to discuss are emotional fallacies, fallacies of emotional argument. Second, that's pathos, right? Second would be ethical, fallacies of ethical arguments, and that would be our ethos. And finally, logos, logically moving up to that, right? Our logical arguments, right? How people present logical fallacies, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these and make sure we can get a kind of a handle on this, okay? I'm also going to be, as we explore these, give you a little bit of a jump, and I don't want you to limit this, right? I want you to prove your critical thinking, that you've understood fallacies, understood Drown as a text, and then understand the possible themes to explore, okay? So in moving closer to that, I will also have a lesson on Drown stories. Not every story, but I have little bits and pieces of what I want you to explore here, okay? But with that being said, let's now unpack these fallacies of emotional argument, okay? So I'm in the bottom of page 80 here, fallacies of emotional argument. Emotional arguments can be powerful and suitable in many circumstances, and most writers use them frequently. However, writers who pull on their readers' heartstrings, just like pathos, okay, or raise their blood pressure too often, or who over-sentimentalize, can violate the good faith on which legitimate argument depends, okay? Let's go over a couple here. I'm not going to go over through every fallacy of argument, but I want to touch on a few in each category. And as you've read this chapter, you understand that the logos or the logical arguments have way more, okay? Because those are a number of fallacious, excuse me, arguments, okay? And we'll see why. Maybe we can come to a conclusion as to why the logical arguments are much more, there's much more to them, okay? First off, let's go over scare tactics, okay? Politicians, advertisers, and public figures sometimes peddle their ideas by frightening people and exaggerating possible dangers well beyond their statistical likelihood. Such ploys work because it's easier to imagine something terrible happening than to appreciate its rarity. Very interesting, right? Scare tactics can also be used to stampede legitimate fears into panic or prejudice. Think the immigration debate, okay? Laborers who generally worry about losing their jobs can be persuaded to fear immigrants. This is exactly what I was talking about, who might work for less money. Seniors living on fixed incomes can be convinced that minor changes to entitlement programs represent dire threats to their well-being. Such tactics have the effect of closing off thinking people because people who are scared often act irrationally, okay? Even well-intended fear campaigns like those directed against smoking, unprotected sex, or the use of illegal drugs can misfire if their warnings prove too shrill or seem hysterical. People just stop listening. That's what I think about with the marijuana debate. Whether you feel like, whether you do smoke it, whatever, it's all good. That's not my point. But I feel like the argument is, so it's been called a gateway drug, right? That's why it's even been heavily punished in this country. Okay, that's a large debate, right? That's something I don't want to get too into. But we can see that being considered a gateway drug, it's like once you smoke marijuana, you undeniably, and this has been made before, especially like with previous kind of drug campaigns, is you will become a drug addict. Okay, that is a scare tactic in a sense, right? I see the value in it sometimes, like, oh, if you really want your son, daughter, students, I don't care, right, not to smoke marijuana, yeah, you kind of want to scare them and say like, oh, you do this, but it's not necessarily true, okay? And as we see now in our country how marijuana is becoming legal, right? It's because those scare tactics are kind of going by the wayside. Like I said, don't want to get too into that because that's a whole nother class, whole nother debate. But we can start understanding how scare tactics are used against us. Okay, in the context of drown, right? You can think about this in a number of ways, right? I don't want to give you too many answers here, but how about when you're leaving your home country, right? The immigrant experience. They have a great example here of how scare tactics are used against immigration. But think about this idea of cultural assimilation as well. Or if you move over there and stop speaking the language, you'll completely forget about your home country. That's a scare tactic in a way. If you treat women as equals, then they will take over. Thinking about masculinity, machismo there. Female subjugation, okay? Just giving you a couple ideas here to think about. Let's go over a couple more, okay? We're still under the umbrella of emotional fallacies. Either or is also a very key one. So we're in the middle of page 81. Either or choices can be well-intentioned strategies to get something accomplished. Parents use them all the time. Eat your broccoli or you won't get dessert. I do this all the damn time. But they become fallacious arguments when they reduce a complicated issue to excessively simple terms. You're either or for me or against me, okay? Or when they're designed to obscure legitimate alternatives. Here, for example, is Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian representative to UN, United Nations, offering the nation of Israel just such a choice in an interview on PBS in January 2014. Think about this. And this is really relevant with our current political climate. Like I said, for this essay, it makes a difference. Or obviously, I want you to engage these fallacies of argument, but I also want you to become a critical navigator of the world, understanding when arguments are fallacious. We can call them out. Call them out as BS if you need to. But let's return back to this Riyad Mansour's piece. He states in 2014, it is up to them, the Israelis, to decide what kind of a state they want to be. Do they want to be a democratic state where Israel will be the state for all its citizens? Or do they want to be a state for the Jewish people, therefore excluding 1.6 million Palestinian Arabs who are Israelis from their society? That debate is not our debate. That debate is their debate. Well, Joel P. Pollack, writing for Breitbart News Network, describes Mansour's claim as a false choice and says Israel already is a Jewish state that nonetheless allows Muslims to be full citizens. The either-or argument Mansour presents, according to Pollack, does not describe the realities of this complex political situation. Okay. Another way I like to think about the either-or is black or white. Okay, it's either black or white. Star Wars, light side, dark side. Why isn't there a gray side, right? Why can't I be kind of sometimes evil, sometimes, So I think that's, it can be fallacious when you go a little bit overboard on the either or. If the either or is too absolute, then it becomes fallacious, especially when you're dealing with humans, nations. Laws are a great way to think about this. Okay, those are complex, right? So let's think about this. Let's go around. Let's go to the next one. Slippery slope. Okay, this is an important one. This is in the middle of 82, page 82 here. The slippery slope fallacy portrays today's tiny misstep as tomorrow's slide into disaster. Some arguments that aim at preventing dire consequences do not take the slippery slope approach. For example, the parent who corrects a child for misbehavior now is acting sensibly to prevent more serious problems as the child grows older. A slippery slope argument becomes wrong-headed when a writer exaggerates the likely consequences of an action, usually to frighten readers. As such, slippery slope arguments are also scare tactics. Very true. In recent years, the issue of gun ownership in America has evoked many slippery slope arguments. Here are two examples, and we can read those on your own time. But actually, we'll read them now. Universal background checks will inevitably be followed by a national registry of gun owners, which will inevitably be followed by confiscation of all their guns. Or a ban on assault-style weapons and 30-round magazines will inevitably be followed by a ban on handguns with 10-round magazines. Social and political ideas and proposals do have consequences, but they aren't always as dire as writers fond of slippery slope tactics would have you believe. So slippery slope is very connected to a scare tactic. Oh, they want to regulate our guns. Next step, they're going to take away all our guns. Next step, we will be under martial control. See how slippery slope works? It's a slippery slope because once you start going, you can't stop, and it's like the worst of the worst. It's like I call it like the Chicken Little, sky is falling. Like everything will come to us. Okay. Like I said, we're not going to talk about every fallacy here, but I want to touch on some of them. I'm not saying that these are. I want you to read all of them because I want you to find how you can unpack the readings with this. But let's take a look at our last one here that I want to touch on, and then we'll get into ethical arguments. Last one I want to touch on is bandwagon appeals. Okay, at the bottom of 83, bandwagon appeals urge people to follow the same path everyone else is taking. This is awesome. Okay, think about cultural assimilation here. Think about female subjugation. If all men treat a woman a certain way, should they also go towards that? Internalized racism. If you see a dominant culture, and I'm thinking about the themes from the essay here. Internalized racism. If you see a dominant culture treat another culture a certain way, and you're trying to fit in, do you kind of align with the dominant culture and become kind of that bandwagon type thinking, right? So there's a lot of ways we could take this, right? So they urge people to follow the same path everyone else is taking. Such arguments can be relatively benign and seem harmless, but they do push people to take the easier path rather than think independently about what choices to make or where to go. I also like to call bandwagon appeals sort of a mob mentality appeal, okay? Think about the mob in the Baldwin piece, right? And think about Jesse in a sense, right? Think about the Panopticon. Think about Jesse in that story. Could he break away? No way, right? It doesn't seem like he ever would, even though he wanted to. And that's debatable as well, okay? 84 at the top. Many American parents seem to have an innate ability to refute bandwagon appeals. When their kids whine, everyone else is going camping without chaperones, and parents reply, and if everyone else jumps off a cliff, blah, 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 would you do it too? The children groan, right? Advertisers, returning back to ads, right, use bandwagon appeals frequently, as this example of a cell phone ad demonstrates. iPhone 5, damn, it's been a minute. Mine's probably a 4. Unfortunately, not all bandwagon approaches are so transparent. In recent decades, bandwagon issues have included war on drugs, the nuclear freeze movement, campaigns against drunk driving, and for freedom of speech, campaigns for immigration reform, bailouts for banks, many fads in education. All these issues are too complex to permit the suspension of judgment that bandwagon tactics require. Super important, okay? So when you think about this, okay, and really what's at the heart of all fallacious arguments is they ignore complexity. That's huge. Because when you think about the fallacies of all immigrants are a certain way, that ignores the complexities, right? Are we talking about refugees? Are we talking about immigrants? Are we talking about all immigrants from a certain country, right? That's problematic, okay? And I'm just saying this for the focus of this essay, but we can start thinking about this. And let's look specifically at this author Junot Diaz here, and we'll read more about his trauma and other supplemental pieces. But he's a Dominican Dominicano, I guess. He's from the Dominican Republic, and he writes from a way that means to unravel and to almost problematize or make complex the Dominican experience, okay? And I'm saying this just from his point of view, right? And what he's writing about. Like, I don't want you to think about this as an autobiography, okay? But he does a lot to unpack these possible themes, okay? Let's move now to ethical arguments. I'm only going to go over two because logical is so much. But ethical arguments, so these are fallacies, of ethical arguments, okay? Because readers give their, and I'm at the bottom of 84, I'm sorry. Because readers give their closest attention to authors they respect or trust, writers usually want to present themselves as honest, well-informed, likable, or sympathetic. But not all the devices that writers use to gain the attention and confidence of readers are admirable, okay? So let's think about these. Appeals to false authority is important. They're all important, right? But for the sake of not making this a 2-hour video, just want to go over a couple, okay? Ad hominem is a pretty easy one, and they open the chapter with talking about how Trump fell to this ad hominem attack of his people, like talking about hand sizes and lazy this and right. So it wasn't even like their policies. He's like attacking them, and he's not the only one who does this, right? But ad hominem arguments attack the character of a person rather than the claims he or she makes. Okay, so when you encounter ad hominem arguments, that's exactly what it is. The person gets attacked, not the ideas or the position. Okay. When you destroy the credibility of your opponents, you either destroy their ability to present reasonable appeals or distract from the successful arguments they'd be offering, okay? Good way to think about this. Sometimes people devolve into ad hominem arguments because they don't have anything left, okay? Like, oh, you feel this way about a certain team. It's like, well, your shirt's ugly. I don't know, right? It doesn't, give me some proof. Give me the receipts, right? During the 2016 presidential primary, Marco Rubio criticized rival candidate Ted Cruz for not speaking Spanish. Was that a valiant argument for why Cruz will not make a good president? It's a great question. Such attacks, of course, aren't aimed at men only, as columnist Jamie Stein proved when she criticized Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor for delaying an Affordable Care Act mandate, objected to the Little House Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic religious order. Stein directly targets Sotomayor's religious beliefs. Okay, you can read that on your own time. Okay. And then Stein, I think it's pronounced, then widens her ad hominem assault to include Catholics in general. Okay, so that's an important point. So why attack her religious beliefs and then Catholics in general? Okay, let's go to the middle of 87. Arguably, ad hominem attacks like this turn arguments into two-sided affairs with good guys and bad guys or gals, and that's unfortunate since character often really does matter in argument. Even though the norms of civic discourse were strained to the limit during and after the 2016 presidential election, it has not changed. Most people still expect the proponent of peace to be civil, a secretary of the treasury to pay his own taxes, the champion of family values to be a faithful spouse, and the head of the EPA to advocate for protecting the environment. But it's fallacious to attack any of these people for their traits, backgrounds, looks, or other irrelevant information. Okay, so we understand ad hominem attacks. Okay. Let's go to stack the deck, and I think we'll move forward to our logical argument section, okay? Yeah, those are actually only 3. Dogmatism is another good one, but you can go over that in your own time. Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's go to, actually, you know what? I apologize. I'm going to go to dogmatism. I don't want to skip that one, but I did. Let's go back to 86 at the top. A writer who asserts or assumes that a particular position is the only one that is conceivably acceptable is expressing dogmatism, a fallacy of character that undermines the trust that must exist between those who make and listen to arguments. When people or organizations write dogmatically, they imply that no arguments are necessary, the truth is self-evident, and needs no support. Here's an extreme example of such an appeal, quoted in an Atlantic story by Tracy Brown Hamilton describing an anti-smoking appeal made by the Third Reich. Brother National Socialist, do you know what your Führer is against smoking and thinks that every German is responsible to the whole people for all his deeds and omissions and does not have the right to damage his body with drugs? Subjects or ideas that can be defended with facts, testimony, and good reasons ought not to be off the table in a free society. It's a great point. In general, whenever someone suggests that even raising an issue for debate is totally unacceptable, think about America at war, for example. Like I said, not trying to be political, but why can't we have that argument of why America's at war, or why we're invading countries, why are we in whatever, right? Whether on the grounds that it is racist, sexist, unpatriotic, blasphemous, insensitive, or offensive in some other way, you should be suspicious, okay? That's an important point, okay? And that gets look at Twitter nowadays, right? Look at, and I'm somebody who's not against it or for it, but like woke culture, right? Um, Big debate now with comedy as well. Oh, should that not be off topic? And this is a really interesting time in our day and age, and I think social media does a lot for these type of fallacious arguments, right? Um, Anyways, let's move forward here. Last one I want to talk about is stacking the deck at the bottom of 87. Just as gamblers try to stack the deck by arranging cards so they are sure to win, writers stack the deck when they show only one side of the story. Okay, it's almost as if like you're loading up your hand with aces. Good way to think about it, right? Because you're just giving the information that helps your side. In a 2000, and I don't know if I want to go over that, right? We could, right? In 2016, New York writer Catherine Schultz discusses the Netflix series Making a Murderer. Schultz notes that the filmmakers have been accused of limiting their evidence, and if you've seen that, it's a great show, in order to convince viewers that the accused, Stephen Avery, had been framed for the crime. You can read that on your own time, but what they're basically saying here, and I can see that even in hindsight, and I love that show, is they were very intent on making him almost seem innocent, right? At the top of 88, in the same way, reviewers have been critical of documentaries by Michael Moore. Okay, hold on one second. And Dinesh D'Souza, that top of 88, show only one side of a story, prove highly selective in their coverage. When you stack the deck, you take a big chance that your readers will react like Schultz and decide not to trust you. That's one reason it's so important to show that you've considered alternatives in making any argument. Okay, and that's important, right? And when you think about Drown, let's return to the prompt a little bit. You can think about how this story is being told to you, how it is being narrated is very key. I like this piece because it's not autobiographical and it's written in a way where you have to really take into account how Diaz, and he's an author, he's presenting a work, but how is the information given to you? That's important. Okay, that's very important. And I'm not saying he's bad or he's intentional. He's intentional, he's an author, but this is a work of fiction. It's not nonfiction, it's fiction, okay? So you can think about how we have these flashbacks, and we'll think about these with the multitude of stories here, okay? And I'm just looking at the stories, but even with, there's Fiesta 1980, Israel, I can see a number of examples here, Drown, Boyfriend, okay? It just, list goes on and on, okay? Let's go to the last one, fallacies of logical argument. And we're in the middle of 88 here, kind of towards the top. Okay, you'll encounter a problem in any argument wherein the claims, warrants, or proofs in it are invalid, insufficient, or disconnected. In theory, such problems seem easy enough to spot, but in practice, it can be camouflaged by skillful use of words or images. Indeed, logical fallacies pose a challenge to civil argument because they often seem reasonable and natural, especially when they appeal to people's self-interest. Okay, so we're going to break down about, I have a lot here that I want to break down. These are, like I said, logical fallacies or fallacies of logical argument, excuse me. There's a lot more here. Okay, there's a lot more here, and we'll see why. I'm not going to go through every one, but I think these are very important when you understand fallacies of argument. First one is hasty generalization. What is that? Hasty generalization is an inference drawn from insufficient evidence. Because my fiat broke down, then all fiats must be junk. It also forms the basis for most stereotypes about peoples or institutions. This is important, right? And I'm going to give you a little bit of an example here, right? Especially with like when I think of how to date a brown girl, black girl, white girl, or halfie, are there a number of hasty generalizations made about women, made about races of women, okay? It also forms a basis for most stereotypes. That's important about people or institutions because a few people in a large group are observed to act in a certain way. Immigration, Dominicans, all members of that group are inferred to behave similarly. The resulting conclusions are usually sweeping claims, and this is where we ignore complexity. This is where generalizations are really made, right? The result, sweeping claims of little merit. Women are bad drivers, men are slobs, English teachers are nitpicky, computer jocks are blank, and on and on and on. Okay, so that's a hasty generalization. People from the Dominican Republic are a certain way, men in that culture are a certain way, women are not able to blah, 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 right? So I want you to think about this, okay? You can unpack, this is a good one to think about in any of these themes here, right? How are hasty generalizations impactful on real people in this story, okay? Or not real people, but real, how do they have real effect on people in this story? Really quick, faulty causality, excuse me. Next one, In Latin, faulty causality is known as post hoc. Okay, and this one you hear like if you want to be a lawyer, this is something you'll be hearing a lot of. Okay, ergo propter hoc, which translates as after this, therefore because of this. The faulty assumption that because one event or action follows another, the first causes the second. Okay, and that's what it is, right? Consider a lawsuit commented on in the Wall Street Journal on the top of 89, in which a writer sued Coors unsuccessfully, claiming that drinking copious amounts of the company's beer had kept him from writing a novel. This argument is sometimes referred to as the Twinkie defense, referring to a claim that the person who shot and killed San Francisco supervisor Harvey Milk had eaten so many Twinkies and other sugary foods that his reasoning had been impaired. The phrase is now sometimes used to label the claims of criminals that their acts were caused by something beyond their control. Recently in the news, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a dude that was, I think it was like, if you could look this up too, it's affluenza. I don't even know if he got off or not, but because he was so affluent, he said something, he gets ended up killing somebody and then running over them or something, right? That's a faulty casualty, right? Not casualty, excuse me, causality, faulty causality, right? And that's faulty because you're like, why? You're so rich that you cannot learn how to drive correctly, or you party too hard? I don't know. Okay, but we can see this happen all the time. Okay, this is a pretty easy one to understand, but I want you to think about how that is a fallacious argument, right? Not everything causes the next thing. Okay, those are, and we think of syllogisms, and it's the same thing we talked about earlier. Okay, let's go to. I want to kind of jump over to a couple more, and then we'll be close to wrapping up. Equivocation, right? Let's go to bottom of page 90. Half-truths are arguments that give lies an honest appearance, are usually based on tricks of language. Consider the plagiarist who copies a paper word for word from a source and then declares that I wrote the entire paper myself, meaning that she physically copied the piece on her own. But the plagiarist is using wrote equivocally, and knows that most people understand the word to mean composing and not merely copying words. This is really interesting. I'm not saying, because I think about the title drown, and I'm not saying it's a fallacious argument, but you can think about it in the same way. That's pretty interesting, right? What does drown mean when you return to it's something to think about. I'm not saying you have to write about that specific title with the specific fallacy of argument, but the fact that the character is drowning, quote unquote. Why are they drowning? What are they drowning from? If it's not water, right? It's interesting. So, on the top of 91, parsing words carefully can sometimes look like equivocation or be the thing itself. For example, during the 2016 presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton was asked regularly, some would say she was hounded, about her use of a private email server, oh my God, and about whether any of the emails contained classified information. Here's what she said on February 1st, 2016. The emails that I received were not marked classified. Now there are disagreements among agencies on what should have been perhaps classified retroactively, but at the time that doesn't change the fact that they were not marked classified. Many commentators at the time have felt that this statement was a clear equivocation, and this controversy continued to haunt Clinton throughout her campaign. Yes, that happens so much. And I mean, even think about her husband, right? If you probably weren't alive back then, but when I did not have sexual relations with that woman, okay, right? What does that really mean? Okay, I mean, technically, I guess that's correct, but then you get into definitions, right? Let's go to the next one. We're going to go to about 4 more of these, and I want to go quickly because these are important ones I want you to think about. 91, a non sequitur, right? Bottom of 91, bottom half. A non sequitur is an argument whose claims, reasons, or warrants don't connect logically. You probably detected a non sequitur when you react to an argument with a puzzled weight that doesn't follow. Children are adept at framing non sequiturs like this one. You don't love me, or you'd buy me a new bike. Oh my God, it's my life. It doesn't take a parental genius to realize that love has a little connection with buying children's toys. Yeah, easy for you to say. Non sequiturs often occur when writers omit steps in an otherwise logical chain of reasoning. For example, it might be a non sequitur to argue that since post-secondary education now costs so much, it's time to move college and university instruction online. Okay, this is a real debate right now. Such a suggestion may have merit, but a leap from brick and mortar schools to virtual ones is extreme, most definitely. You guys are taking an online course here, right? So yeah, for some of you, this may be more challenging, right? But for some of you, it works. Okay, numerous issues and questions must be addressed step by step before the proposal can be taken seriously. Okay, politicians sometimes resort to non sequiturs to evade thorny issues or questions. Okay, here, for example, is Donald Trump replying to questions in a 27 interview with Michael Scherer in the Time magazine. Scherer states, Mitch McConnell said he'd rather you stop tweeting, that he sees it as a distraction. Trump, Mitch will speak for himself. Mitch is a wonderful man. Mitch should speak for himself. Here, Trump does not respond to the claim the interview says Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has made, but instead abruptly changes the subject commenting instead on McConnell saying he's a wonderful man. Okay, exactly. I mean, and no offense if you're a Trump supporter or whatever, I'm not making this political, but he's a master of non sequiturs. Okay, saying things that don't connect to what comes before. Anywho, next one, 92, straw man. Those who resort to the straw man fallacy attack arguments that no one is really making or portray opponents' positions as more extreme or far less coherent than they actually are. Okay, think about this as a straw man, as like almost like a scarecrow, right? Middle of 92. The speaker writer thus sets up an argument that is conveniently easy to knock down, like a man of straw, proceeds to do so, and then claims victory over an opponent who may not exist. Straw men are especially convenient devices for politicians who want to characterize the positions of their opponents as more extreme than they actually are. Consider obvious memes such as war on women and war on Christmas. That's actually very true. But strawman arguments are often more subtle. For instance, Stephen Novella of Yale University argues that political commentator Charles Krauthammer slips into the fallacy when he misconstrues the meaning of settled science in a column on climate change. Climate change is a great topic to discuss arguments, fallacious arguments. Novella rebutes Krauthammer's assertion that there is nothing more anti-scientific than the very idea that science is settled, static, impervious to challenge by explaining why such a claim is deceptive. Let's continue here. Calling something an established scientific fact means that it is reasonable to proceed with the fact that as a premise for further research or for policy. It does not mean static, impervious to challenge. That is the straw man. Both evolution deniers and climate change deniers use this tactic to misinterpret scientific confidence as an anti-scientific resistance to new evidence or arguments. It isn't. Awesome. In other words, Krauthammer's definition of science is not one that most scientists use. Okay, so it's a straw man in the sense that it's easily knocked down. Okay, be careful. You don't want to write in this way as well. Okay, and that's something I want to make an important point about. When you are engaging arguments, be careful that you do not fall into any of these fallacies yourself. That is a huge point. Okay. Let's go to the last two, red herring. Not the last two of the section, but these are the last two I'm going to discuss for the time being. Okay. Red herring is also a very important one. This fallacy gets its name from the old British hunting practice of dragging a dried herring across the path of the fox in order to throw the hounds off the trail. A red herring fallacy does just that. It changes the subject abruptly or introduces an irrelevant claim or fact to throw readers or listeners off the trail. For example, people skeptical about climate change will routinely note that weather is always changing and point to the fact that Vikings settled in Greenland 1,000 years ago before harsher conditions drove them away. True scientists will say, but the point is irrelevant to arguments about worldwide global warming caused by human activity. The red herring is not only a device writers and speakers use in the arguments they create, but is also a charge used frequently to undermine someone else's arguments. Couple the term red herring in a web search to just about any political or social issue cause, and I want you to try to do this, okay? And you'll come up with numerous articles complaining of someone's use of the device. Climate change plus red herring, white supremacy plus red herring, immigration reform plus red herring. Red herring has become a convenient way of saying, I disagree with your argument or your point is irrelevant, and perhaps making a too easy rebuttal like that can itself be a fallacy, ? Okay, and that's true, okay, and that's something that we can think about when we think about fallacies, right? This is just a way to get you off the scent, quote unquote, get you off the topic, finding any way to kind of divert your attention and not stay focused on, and you'll see this all the time. Look at political debates. You can not mark these down, pretty much all of these, right? Last one that we'll go over is faulty analogy. Comparisons can help to clarify one concept by measuring it against another that is more familiar. Consider the power and humor of this comparison attributed to Mark Twain, an implicit argument for term limits in politics. Politicians and diapers must be changed often, and for the same reason. Heard that all the time. When comparisons such as this one are extended, they become analogies, ways of understanding unfamiliar ideas by comparing them with something that's better known. Okay, see page 76. But useful as such comparisons are, may prove false if either taken on their own and pushed too far or taken too seriously. At this point, they turn into faulty analogies, inaccurate or inconsequential comparisons between objects or concepts. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos found herself in a national controversy following a statement she made after meeting with historically black colleges and universities, presidents of Washington, when she made an analogy between HCBUs and her advocacy of school choice today. The African Americans saw that the system wasn't working, that there was an absence of opportunity, so they took it upon themselves to provide the solution. HBCUs are real pioneers when it comes to school choice. They are living proof that when more options are provided to students, they are often afforded greater access and greater quality. Their success was shown that more options help students flourish. This is problematic, right? What commentators immediately pointed out was that this statement included false analogies. HBCUs were not created to provide more choice for African American students, and thus be analogous to DeVos's push for charter and school choice, but rather because these students had little to no choice. After the Civil War, African American students were barred from most white public institutions. I really love this textbook for that reason. This is a great argument here, and this is a great example in proving or in showing you what a faulty analogy is. And it's very insulting in the sense that Betsy DeVos here, what they're talking about, Betsy DeVos uses that as like almost as if these students had a choice and they were thinking about HBCUs as like, oh, let me go to this college that I'm being segregated from, or let me go to a historic, I'll choose. No, this was almost happened out of necessity. Racism, necessity in the wake of racism. Okay, and that's a good point, because then if you, not only is it a fallacious argument, it's also very it's very insulting, and it's very it ignores the fact, the harsh reality of what was going on at that time. Okay, so you as a critical thinker can definitely wade through that and understand, you know what, this is incorrect for a number of reasons, and it's very hurtful to a community of people. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. That was kind of a long video on fallacies. When engaging these fallacies and reviewing this text after this talk, go back and see these. I then want you to do the same exercise that I've done. Look at the fallacies and look at the themes and look at the prompt. Okay, so then when you revisit Drown, revisit the prompt, revisit the fallacies, you will have a sharper sense of unpacking the readings. Okay, you only have to use 2, but I want you to use specific, and thinking about teaching your reader about this, 2 specific fallacies of argument in unpacking your stories in the course of the paper. Okay, and as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a good one. Talk to you soon.